For a whole month, the quiet town had been losing sleep because of a strange sound that echoed through the night. It started softly at first, like a distant whine that could have been the wind, but it grew louder as the days passed. By the end of the second week, people were waking up almost every night, sitting on their beds, listening with confused faces as the sound stretched through the darkness. It wasn't a normal cry. It wasn't from any animal the town knew. It wasn't the howl of a dog, or the cry of a fox, or even the echo of a bird. It sounded like something large and heartbroken, weeping in a way no creature on earth should. Some thought it was a prank. Others believed it was a lost machine somewhere in the forest. A few elders shook their heads and said it sounded like a creature carrying a heavy sadness. But no one dared to go deep into the woods at night to find it. The forest behind the small town was dense and dark, and even during the day, people usually kept to the edges. Among the townsfolk was a mechanic who worked in a small workshop at the far end of the town. He was used to late nights because machines rarely cared about anyone's sleeping schedule. He fixed engines, tool parts, broken farming machines, and anything else that needed skilled hands. Because he stayed up late repairing things, he heard the strange cry more clearly than most. He first heard it when he was closing his workshop on a chilly evening. The sky was dark blue, and the moon had just risen. He paused, keys in his hand, when the sound drifted through the quiet air. It came from the forest, long and trembling, like someone in deep pain. He looked toward the trees, feeling a strange pull of curiosity. He had grown up hearing the normal sounds of the woods animals rustling, owls calling, the wind brushing through leaves, but this was not normal. The next night he heard it again, and again the night after that. Every time the cry sounded lonely, almost like a small child crying out for help. But the strength and depth of the sound suggested something much larger than a child, something with lungs far stronger and a voice far heavier. The mechanic couldn't ignore it. Even when he tried to focus on tightening bolts or checking wires, his hands would slow down when the cry echoed. He found himself listening carefully, thinking about what creature could produce such a heartbroken sound. The rest of the town stayed quiet about it, but he felt like the cry was directed at someone, maybe not him in particular, but at anyone who could understand suffering. As the nights passed, the sound grew sharper, as if whatever creature was crying was growing weaker. Some nights the cry came suddenly, loud, trembling, then fading into short whimpers that barely carried over the wind. On other nights, the cry lasted long, stretching over minutes, like a deep sadness that refused to calm down. One evening, after a long day of repairing a tractor engine, the mechanic sat outside his workshop. He leaned back on an old wooden chair, wiping his hands with a cloth, tired but restless. The sun had just disappeared behind the hills, and the sky had turned a mix of purple and deep blue. The air smelled faintly of oil from the workshop and fresh leaves from the forest. Then it happened again. The cry rose suddenly, louder than before, almost shaking the stillness of the night. The mechanic froze for a moment. This time, there was something different in the sound, less anger, more fear. Like something was suffering and didn't know how to stop the pain. A cold chill ran through him, not because he was afraid, but because the cry felt too real, too filled with emotion to ignore. He turned his head toward the forest and listened closely. The cry came again, shorter, followed by a shaky, helpless sound. He stood up slowly, leaving his chair behind him. Something inside pushed him forward. He had always been someone who helped others through his work. People trusted him with their broken machines, and he always found a way to bring them back to life. But this was different. This wasn't a machine. This was a living being, hidden somewhere among the trees, suffering alone in the dark. He walked a few steps toward the edge of the forest. The moonlight made the leaves shimmer faintly. The woods looked calm, but the cry made everything feel strange, like there was something hiding behind the calmness. something hurting deeply. For the first time, he wondered if it could be an injured animal trapped somewhere. He thought about large animals, maybe a bear, maybe something else. But no bear cried like that. No known creature on earth cried like that. The sound had a strange echo, almost like there was a deeper tone beneath it, something not completely natural. Still, he didn't step into the forest that night. Not yet. Curiosity tugged at him, but he also knew the woods well enough to understand that rushing into darkness alone was dangerous. Instead, he stood at the edge, listening to the cries gradually fade into quiet sobs. He stayed there until the sound finally went silent. Only the soft wind was left. Then he walked back to his workshop, locked it, and went home. But sleep avoided him that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing the memory of the cry echo in his mind. It didn't sound angry. It didn't sound wild. It sounded sad, deeply sad, almost desperate. The next morning, he woke with a heaviness in his chest, as if the cry had become part of him. While working on a damaged motor, he found himself glancing toward the forest more than usual. He wondered what kind of creature could cry like that every night for a whole month. How could something survive so long without help? And why did no one else seem willing to check? People talked about it sometimes, mostly in whispers. Some said the sound was unlucky. Others said it was best not to disturb whatever it was. A few joked about strange creatures, but everyone kept their distance just in case. The mechanic understood their fear, but he also knew fear sometimes stopped people from doing what needed to be done. That evening, as he closed his workshop again, he stood outside a little longer than usual. The sky darkened and the air cooled. He waited. Minutes passed. Then finally, right on time, the cry rose again. He felt it hit him differently this time. It wasn't just sorrow. It was exhaustion. The creature sounded weaker, like it couldn't go on crying much longer. The mechanic's heart tightened. He made a quiet decision. He would go into the forest the next night. Not to hunt, not to fight, but simply to look. To see if something was trapped. To see if he could help. Maybe he would find nothing. Maybe he would find something strange. Maybe he would regret it. But he knew he wouldn't forgive himself if he ignored that cry forever. He went home and packed a small bag with a flashlight, a water bottle, and a few basic tools things he always trusted. He didn't know what he would find, but tools always made him feel prepared. That night, he lay awake, listening to the distant, trembling cries drifting over the town. They no longer frightened him. They made him feel responsible. Somewhere in the forest, something was crying every night like a lost child. And he was the only one willing to find out why not. And with that promise in his mind, he waited for the next night to come. The night arrived slower than usual, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The mechanic checked his small bag once again. Flashlight? Check. Tools? Check. Water? Check. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that he was only going to look. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't seeking fame. He just couldn't ignore the cries anymore. The sound had become a part of the nights in the town, a reminder of someone or something suffering. He stepped outside, the ground cold under his boots. The moonlight was brighter tonight, reflecting off the leaves and making the shadows dance. The first cry came sooner than he expected, a long trembling sound that made him pause mid-step. It was closer this time, and it carried a weight of desperation that made his chest tighten. He walked slowly, carefully placing his feet over roots and rocks, letting his eyes adjust to the dark. Every so often, he would stop and listen. The cry came again, louder, and he realized it was not a simple sound. It carried emotion, and beneath it was a subtle rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. The mechanic wondered if the creature was calling for someone it trusted, if it had been crying for a month, hoping someone would finally come. The deeper he went, the thicker the trees became. Branches scraped lightly against his jacket, and the occasional hoot of an owl made him jump slightly. But he didn't turn back. He followed the cry through winding paths, past large rocks and fallen logs. At times, he felt like he was stepping into a dream, a strange place where nothing was familiar, yet everything felt alive. After what felt like hours, the sound led him to a small clearing. His flashlight beam moved over the area slowly, and then he saw it. At first, he couldn't believe his eyes. A dragon, or something like a dragon, was lying in the center of the clearing. It was enormous, its body long and scaled, its wings folded awkwardly against its sides. Its scales shimmered faintly in the moonlight, but not in the way dragons are often described in stories. They looked real, raw, and tired, as if every scale had endured hardship. The creature's head was lowered to the ground. Its large eyes were closed, but tears streaked down its cheeks, catching the moonlight. And then it made the sound again, a low, heartbreaking cry that made the mechanic take a small step closer. Every instinct told him to stop, to turn back, but he couldn't. He needed to see, needed to understand. He noticed something strange immediately. Despite its size, the dragon did not move aggressively. Its chest rose and fell heavily, showing fatigue and distress. The wings twitched occasionally, but there was no hint of hostility. The cries weren't threats. They were pain. Pure, deep, human-like pain. The mechanic took a slow, careful step forward. The dragon's head lifted slightly, just enough for him to see its eyes. They were enormous, golden with flecks of green, and full of confusion and fear. The dragon blinked at him slowly, as if trying to decide whether he was friend or foe. He froze, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. The dragon tilted its head, listening to him, studying him. It was a moment that stretched on, heavy and quiet. Then the creature lowered its head back to the ground and let out another long, quivering cry. It sounded so much like a human baby crying that the mechanic's throat tightened. He moved a little closer, speaking softly, trying to reassure the creature. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he said, voice shaking just a little. The dragon's ears, or what looked like ears, twitched, as if it recognized the kindness in his tone. The clearing was silent after that, except for the creature's shallow breathing and occasional sobs. The mechanic didn't rush. He had learned that anything in pain needed time. He lowered himself slowly to the ground, sitting a few meters away, not daring to make sudden movements. He kept his flashlight aimed gently, so it didn't blind the dragon. Hours seemed to pass like minutes as he observed. He noticed small details. The dragon's scales were chipped and scratched, as if it had struggled or been trapped. Its claws dug into the soft earth, leaving marks, and its tail occasionally twitched, showing discomfort. Every now and then it sniffed the air, listening to the sounds of the forest, yet never looking fully relaxed. The mechanic tried to think like the creature. Why was it here? Why had it been crying every night for a month? No predator he knew would allow it to remain in one place, injured and exposed. And why had it not flown away? Its wings, though folded, looked strong enough to lift it. Something was stopping it, some pain or fear that kept it here, making it suffer in silence. Night passed slowly, and the mechanic didn't leave. He brought out a small piece of bread from his bag and tossed it gently toward the dragon. The creature sniffed it carefully, hesitated, then nudged it with its nose. After a few moments, it began eating slowly, as if unsure it was safe. That small act of trust filled the mechanic with hope. Maybe he could help. He decided to stay longer, watching the dragon until the first light of dawn touched the tops of the trees. The cries finally stopped as morning approached, replaced by low, shallow breathing. The dragon seemed exhausted, but a little calmer, as if the presence of someone kind had eased its fear slightly. When the sun rose, the mechanic stood and stretched. He couldn't leave now, not after seeing the creature up close. He needed to find out what had caused so much suffering. But he also knew he couldn't rush. Whatever had caused this dragon pain, it had endured alone for a month. Patience, he reminded himself, was the first step. Over the next few days, the mechanic returned each evening. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes water. Sometimes he just sat at the edge of the clearing, letting the dragon know he was there. No threat, no rush. He watched closely, learning its behavior. He noticed the dragon liked to curl its tail around itself at night, protecting its sides. It often flinched when touching one side of its chest, and sometimes faint glowing lines appeared under its scales, almost like small sparks running through its body. That was strange, and it made him curious. Every night he got closer, a little closer each time. He never forced himself into the dragon's personal space, but gradually the dragon allowed him to come within a few meters. Sometimes, when he spoke softly, the creature would stop crying entirely for a few minutes. Those were the moments that filled him with determination. He began to think that the cries weren't just from injury, they were from confusion and helplessness. Whatever had caused the dragon pain was something it didn't understand or couldn't remove on its own. And that realization made the mechanic more certain. He would find the reason, no matter how strange it was. By the end of the week, he could sit closer than ever before. He could see the small quivers in its wings, the subtle tension in its muscles, and the faint traces of light under its scales. His mind worked like a machine itself, analyzing every detail. He wondered if it had been hurt by something mechanical, some foreign object, or even a device that caused the pain. That night, after hours of observation, he felt he was ready for the next step. He would try to approach the creature slowly, gently, to see if he could inspect the glowing part of its chest. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew the crying had lasted too long. For a month, the dragon had cried every night like a baby, and he was determined to discover why. And as the night deepened, he finally took a slow step forward, one that would change everything. The night was calm, but there was a strange tension in the air. The mechanic took slow, careful steps into the clearing, feeling the crunch of leaves under his boots. He had been visiting this place for a week now, watching the dragon from a distance, offering food, speaking softly, and letting it get used to his presence. But tonight felt different. Tonight he wanted to get closer. Not too close, but close enough to understand why the dragon had been crying every night for a month. The creature lay in its usual spot, wings folded and tail curled around its body. Its eyes opened slightly as he approached, large golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. They were cautious, but there was less fear than before. The dragon had started to recognize him, understand that he meant no harm. He stopped a few meters away, sat down on a rock, and spoke softly. "I just want to see if I can help you. I won't hurt you." His voice shook a little, though he tried to keep it steady. The dragon tilted its head, listening, and then let out a soft sigh. It wasn't crying this time, but there was still tension in its body. The mechanic studied the creature carefully. He noticed the subtle movements he hadn't seen clearly before. One side of its chest twitched as it breathed. The scales there seemed slightly raised, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. There was something beneath them, something unnatural, almost like a tiny machine or object pressing against the dragon's skin. That was new. He hadn't realized before that there could be a cause beyond injury or fear. He took out a small notebook and began sketching what he could see from a safe distance. He recorded the movements, the strange glow, the reactions when he spoke. He was a mechanic, not a scientist, but he had worked with strange engines, odd devices, and machinery that didn't always make sense. His instincts told him this might not be a natural injury. Hours passed as he sat quietly. The dragon stayed, mostly still, occasionally shifting its wings or scratching gently at its side with its claws. The twitches grew slightly more noticeable. The mechanic leaned closer, speaking in a low voice, trying to reassure it. The creature didn't move away. It just watched, trembling faintly, as if debating whether to trust him completely. Finally, the mechanic decided he had to take the next step. He slowly extended his hand, keeping it low and moving in a gentle circular motion. He didn't want to scare the dragon, just to show that he was patient. The dragon watched, flinching slightly but not retreating. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment of truth. He whispered again, "I just want to help." And then, very carefully, he reached the glowing part of its chest. The scales were warm under his fingers, and the faint pulsing beneath them was unmistakable. It was definitely some kind of object. Not natural, not part of the dragon's body. He felt it press lightly against his hand, and he realized why the creature had been crying every night. It wasn't pain from hunger or fear alone. It was pain from this object, embedded beneath its scales, pressing into its chest, making every movement uncomfortable. It was something the dragon couldn't remove on its own, something small but powerful enough to cause immense suffering. He pulled back slightly, unsure what to do next. He was a mechanic, not a surgeon, but he had tools. He had experience with delicate machines, with removing broken parts and repairing them. Maybe he could do something. Maybe he could stop this suffering. For the first time, the dragon stayed completely still. It seemed to sense that he had understood the cause of its pain. There was no struggle, no panic, only trembling. He leaned in closer, speaking softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." Minutes passed. He studied the object carefully. It was small, metallic, and pulsing with heat. The edges were sharp enough to tear through soft flesh, and that explained the twitches and tears. The dragon had been living with this for a month, crying every night because it couldn't remove it. His chest tightened at the thought. No one should endure so much pain alone. He took a deep breath, steadying his hands. Using a small set of tools, he began to work slowly. One by one, he examined the edges, testing gently to see how tightly it was embedded. The dragon's breathing became more uneven, but it stayed still. The trust between them was growing, fragile but real. He worked carefully, piece by piece. He spoke softly the entire time, keeping the dragon calm. Almost there. Just a little longer. He could feel its heart racing beneath his hands, its large body trembling faintly. Every nerve in his own body was alert. One wrong move, and he could hurt it more. Time seemed to stretch into eternity. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the object came loose. The dragon flinched as it was removed, but immediately a wave of relief swept through its body. Its breathing became slower, more relaxed. The trembling stopped, and for the first time in a month, the dragon's chest rose and fell without pain. The mechanic sat back, exhausted but relieved. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The dragon's golden eyes looked at him, wide and soft, almost like it was saying thank you in its own way. Tears still streaked its face, but they were different now. Not cries of pain, but tears of release. He stayed there for a long while, watching. The dragon lowered its head slightly, nudging him gently as if to show trust. He reached out slowly and touched its snout. It didn't flinch. The connection was real, human and creature, sharing a moment of understanding. Over the next few nights, the mechanic continued visiting. The dragon no longer cried. Its body, once tense and trembling, was calmer. It allowed him to come closer, to sit beside it, to offer food and water. Sometimes it even let out a soft, purr-like sound, something he had never heard from any animal before. It was content, and it trusted him. He studied it carefully during those nights. The wings, once folded tensely, stretched slowly in the moonlight. The scales glimmered with natural shimmer now, not the faint glowing of the embedded object. It was as if the dragon itself was healing, recovering from both the pain and the fear of the past month. He couldn't understand fully where it had come from, or how it got here. The glowing object suggested it was not entirely from this world. But that didn't matter to him. What mattered was that it was alive, suffering, and now safe. That was enough. The bond between them grew silently. The mechanic felt it in the way the dragon stayed near him, in the way it followed his movements. With gentle curiosity, in the soft hum of relief that seemed to vibrate from its body. He realized that helping it had changed him too. Nights that once felt heavy and anxious now carried hope. He was part of something bigger, something beyond explanation. During these nights, he also noticed small habits of the dragon. It liked to press its nose to the ground in the clearing, perhaps smelling the earth, perhaps checking the environment. It would occasionally flick its tail, sometimes to swat leaves, sometimes just to stretch. And it had moments of pure stillness, where it closed its eyes completely, letting the moonlight warm its scales. The mechanic began documenting everything carefully in his notebook. Not just the appearance or the behavior, but the tiny signs of trust. The dragon no longer flinched at his voice. It no longer flinched at his presence. And most importantly, it no longer cried. The night sky changed slowly as days passed. The townsfolk still slept with unease, not knowing that the cries had stopped. The mechanic didn't mind. He had become the dragon's secret guardian, the only one who had seen its pain and stayed to help. And though he didn't know what the future held, he knew that the dragon would no longer suffer alone. A connection had been formed, not through words, but through trust, patience, and care. The mechanic had discovered the reason for the month-long cries, and in doing so, had formed a bond that neither of them could have anticipated. From that moment on, he realized something important. Sometimes, helping wasn't about strength or bravery. It was about noticing pain, showing patience, and refusing to turn away when someone needed you. And the dragon, in all its quiet wisdom, had taught him that lesson in the most profound way. By the time dawn approached again, the mechanic sat back and watched the creature relax fully, wings slightly open, chest rising evenly, and eyes reflecting the first light of the morning. He smiled faintly. The dragon's suffering had ended, and something new had begun. A quiet understanding between a human and a creature that no one else had believed existed. After the object was removed, the mechanic thought the dragon would simply relax and leave it at that. But over the next few nights, he realized there was more to understand. The dragon was calm, yes, but it was still restless in subtle ways. Its breathing was smooth, but sometimes it twitched, sometimes it nudged the earth beneath it as if searching for something. Its golden eyes would follow him carefully, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with a flicker of worry. The cries had stopped, but its discomfort hadn't completely vanished. The mechanic knew that if he wanted to truly help the dragon, he had to understand the reason behind the object in the first place. It wasn't normal for such a creature to carry something metallic inside it, and the faint glow he had seen beneath its scales before removal suggested it wasn't just a random piece of metal. It was some kind of device, alien in nature. He didn't know how it got there or why, but he had to investigate. He began carefully examining the object he had removed. It was small, about the size of a human fist, metallic, with strange markings on its surface. Tiny lines ran across it, faintly glowing even after removal, and he could feel a soft warmth emanating from it. His experience as a mechanic told him it was some kind of device, perhaps even a machine, but its design was unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't broken in a normal way. It looked functional, but malfunctioning at the same time. He set up a small workspace in his workshop, laying out the object carefully. He cleaned it, inspecting every line, every curve, every edge. The markings seemed purposeful, as if the device had been made to attach to the dragon in a specific way. He realized the device must have caused the pain by pressing against nerves or some vital part of the creature's body. That explained why the dragon had cried every night. For the first time, the mechanic felt a mix of awe and fear. This was not something from Earth. It was alien, advanced, and dangerous to the dragon without its knowledge. And yet, it wasn't meant to harm the dragon permanently. It seemed to be designed for control or monitoring. That thought made him shiver. Someone, somewhere, had sent this device, and the dragon had no way to remove it. Determined to understand more, he studied the device for hours, testing its parts carefully. He traced the faint wires and grooves, noticing the way energy seemed to flow through them in pulses. Each pulse was slow, irregular, and obviously causing pain. He could see why the dragon had been unable to move freely. The device wasn't just heavy. It was invasive. Meanwhile, the dragon stayed near the clearing each night, watching him work from a safe distance. It seemed to sense that he was trying to help it, even if it didn't understand what he was doing. Its trust in him had grown steadily, and it allowed him to move closer than before. Occasionally, it would make a soft hum or nudge at the ground, as if asking questions it couldn't speak aloud. The mechanic smiled faintly each time. Somehow, it was communicating with him, silently, in ways that went beyond language. He decided to take careful notes and record observations. He compared the device to old engines and circuits he had repaired. It wasn't mechanical in the traditional sense. It seemed organic and technological at the same time. It reacted to the dragon's heartbeat and body heat, and that was why it caused so much pain. Any movement, any breath, would trigger a pulse of discomfort. It wasn't lethal, but it was unbearable over time. That explained why the dragon had cried nightly for a month without stopping. He realized that if he wanted to help fully, he would need to disable the device completely. It wasn't enough to remove it. Someone could come looking for it. The dragon might still be in danger if the device remained functional. He needed to study it carefully before attempting anything more advanced. Each night, he returned to the forest with tools and notes, observing the dragon. He watched how it moved, how it positioned itself, how it reacted to moonlight and wind. He noticed subtle patterns. It preferred certain parts of the clearing, avoided some shadows, and occasionally flinched at the faintest glimmer on the forest floor. The creature was sensitive, and he realized he had to be patient. Healing, both physical and emotional, would take time. As he observed, he also thought about the creature's past. How had it arrived in this forest? How had it survived a month in pain without seeking help elsewhere? It was alone, lost, and vulnerable, yet it had endured. There was a quiet strength in the dragon, a resilience he admired. But he knew it still needed guidance, care, and protection. He began bringing small comforts each night. Water in a shallow container, soft moss for it to rest on, sometimes food. He watched carefully how it accepted these gestures, how its eyes would soften, how its body would relax slightly. There was no rush, no forcing. It was all earned slowly, step by step. And slowly, the dragon's trust in him grew. One night, he noticed something new. The dragon's chest twitched slightly where the device had been embedded. He knelt carefully near it, observing. Its eyes followed him, wide and alert. He spoke softly, "I know it hurts sometimes, but I'm going to make sure nothing ever bothers you again." The dragon's breathing seemed to ease at his words, as if understanding, even if partially, what he meant. The mechanic realized that the dragon wasn't just physically affected by the device. It had emotional trauma as well. For a month, it had lived in pain, crying every night, fearing unknown threats, unable to move freely. Healing would take time, not just for its body, but for its mind. The cries had stopped, but lingering tension remained. He spent hours examining the clearing itself, noting how the dragon moved and rested. He noticed small trails where it had paced, small divots in the ground where it had scratched or leaned. Each detail told a story. He began to understand the creature's habits, its needs, its fears. Every observation became part of a plan. He wouldn't just remove objects. He would create a safe space for it, somewhere it could recover fully, somewhere it could trust without worry. During one of these nights, a soft wind blew through the clearing, carrying the scent of the forest. The dragon lifted its head, sniffing the air, then slowly approached him. It stopped a few feet away and lowered its massive head gently, almost as if testing the safety of the moment. The mechanic reached out a trembling hand, and the dragon let him touch the tip of its snout. It flinched slightly, but didn't move away. That was a breakthrough. He realized that the dragon's pain had been physical, yes, but also mental. The device had caused fear and confusion as much as physical discomfort. Now, with it removed and carefully studied, he could start helping the dragon heal completely. It would take patience, care, and understanding, but he was ready. He understood the stakes now, and he was determined to see it through. He worked slowly, every night, learning more about the creature and the strange device that had caused so much pain. He kept detailed notes, sketches, and observations. He even began experimenting with ways to fully disable the device in case it tried to activate again. His mechanical skills became essential in understanding technology far beyond Earth's limits. But while he worked, he never forced the dragon. He let it move freely, rest when tired, and make decisions about how close it wanted him to be. Trust could not be rushed. And slowly, as nights passed, the dragon became calmer. Its movements were more fluid, its eyes softer, its body less tense. Even the occasional twitches faded. The mechanic realized that helping this creature was not just about repairing a device or removing a foreign object. It was about connection, trust, and patience. He had become part of its world, and it had become part of his. And as he watched the dragon lie quietly under the moonlight, breathing easily for the first time in weeks, he knew that the bond they had formed was real and unbreakable. He had discovered the hidden cause of the pain, studied it carefully, and ensured the dragon was safe. But the story wasn't over. There was still much to learn about this creature, its origins, and the strange technology that had caused so much suffering. And he was ready to discover it, step by step, night by night, with patience, care, and unwavering determination. From that night on, the mechanic didn't just see a dragon. He saw a living being with needs, fears, and emotions. He saw a silent plea for help, a creature that had endured pain without complaint. And he knew that his role was more than fixing objects. It was to understand, to protect, and to heal, one night at a time. And the dragon, once crying every night like a lost child, began to show the first signs of trust, calm, and hope. The night air was still, and the forest seemed quieter than usual. The mechanic carried his tools carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He had spent weeks observing the dragon, studying the strange object that had caused its suffering, and gradually earning its trust. Now he felt ready to do the most important step: repair, disable or neutralize the device completely so the creature could live without fear, pain, or discomfort ever again. He arrived at the clearing, his flashlight illuminating the soft ground. The dragon was there, lying quietly with its wings folded and tail coiled around itself. Its golden eyes watched him as he approached, calm but alert. It was as if it sensed the importance of this night, and the mechanic could feel the unspoken connection between them. He set down his bag slowly and knelt on the ground, speaking in a soft voice. "Tonight, I will make sure you never feel pain from this again. Trust me, please." The dragon tilted its head slightly and let out a low hum. It didn't move away. It stayed, trembling just a little, but mostly relaxed. The mechanic smiled faintly, feeling the weight in his chest ease slightly. Patience had brought them to this moment, and he knew the creature trusted him enough to proceed. He opened his bag and carefully laid out his tools. Screwdrivers, pliers, small brushes, and delicate instruments, all the things he would need to work on the device. He examined the object again, holding it gently in his hands. It pulsed faintly, warm and alive, but now harmless outside the dragon's body. He studied the edges, the grooves, the glowing markings, and tested how each piece moved. For the first time, he began disassembling it carefully. Tiny pieces came apart, revealing intricate mechanisms unlike any machine he had worked on before. Wires, circuits, and organic-like components intertwined in ways that seemed almost alive. It was complicated, delicate, and he had to proceed slowly. One wrong move could ruin the device or cause harm to the dragon if it were still inside. He worked slowly, whispering encouragement to the dragon, who watched him with alert curiosity. Its breathing was steady, but he could feel its tension in the small movements of its chest and wings. "Almost done," he murmured softly. "Just a little longer." Hours passed, but he didn't stop. Every tiny adjustment mattered. He carefully detached wires that seemed to carry the painful pulses, neutralized the circuits that reacted to movement, and ensured that the device could no longer affect the dragon, even if someone tried to reactivate it. His hands were steady, but sweat ran down his forehead. He was exhausted, but determination kept him focused. Finally, he removed the last component. The device lay disassembled in his hands, harmless, cold, and still. He exhaled deeply, relief flooding his body. The dragon let out a soft sigh, a sound that made his heart tighten. It stretched its massive wings slowly, letting out a low, content hum. Its golden eyes met his, wide and soft, filled with something he could only describe as gratitude. He moved closer, slowly kneeling beside it. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe now. Nothing will hurt you again." The dragon's head lowered slightly, nudging him gently with its snout. It flinched just a little, but stayed as if testing whether this was real. And in that moment, the mechanic knew the trust between them was complete. Over the next few nights, the mechanic stayed near the clearing, observing the dragon. Its behavior had changed completely. No more trembling, no more restless movements, no more painful twitches. It moved freely now, stretching its wings, walking carefully through the clearing and exploring the edges without fear. Occasionally, it would let out soft hums or purr-like sounds, and the mechanic had learned to interpret them as expressions of comfort or curiosity. He brought small comforts with him: water, soft moss, food. But now, the dragon approached these offerings willingly, even playfully at times. It would sniff the containers, nudge them gently, and sometimes even swipe at them with its claws without aggression. Watching this, the mechanic felt a deep sense of accomplishment. It was more than fixing a machine. It was restoring life, trust, and freedom. One night, as he sat quietly observing, the dragon did something new. It lowered its head fully and allowed him to rest his hand gently on its snout. He could feel its warm breath, steady and calm. It didn't flinch or pull away. For a moment, the clearing was filled with silence, except for the soft sound of its breathing and the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was a moment of pure connection. The mechanic realized that healing the dragon had not been just a physical process. It had been emotional, mental, and patient work. The creature had endured weeks of pain, confusion, and fear, yet it had survived. And now, through trust and care, it was learning that the world wasn't always dangerous. That realization brought a quiet joy to the mechanic, one that he hadn't felt from fixing any machine before. He also began noticing small signs of personality in the dragon. It was curious about his tools, sometimes sniffing them, nudging them, or tapping them gently. It liked to explore the clearing slowly, stretching its wings in the moonlight, or pressing its snout to the ground to examine scents. It had preferences and habits, just like any intelligent being. The mechanic found himself observing these habits carefully, learning how to interact with it in ways that made the creature feel comfortable. Time passed, and the bond between them grew stronger. The dragon no longer feared him or the forest. It followed him sometimes, sitting nearby while he worked on small repairs in the clearing, or resting close by while he took notes. They shared a silent understanding, an unspoken communication that went beyond words. And the mechanic realized that the dragon was no longer just a creature he had helped. It was a companion, a friend, and a being that trusted him completely. He also thought about what the dragon had endured before finding him. A whole month of crying every night, alone and in pain, must have been terrifying. And yet it had survived, showing resilience that inspired him deeply. The dragon's recovery wasn't just about removing the device. It was about patience, care, and the quiet strength of compassion. That lesson stayed with him as he sat by the clearing each night, watching his friend regain confidence and calm. One evening, the dragon did something that surprised him. It moved close, very close, until its head was almost resting on his lap. Its eyes met his, steady and unafraid, and it let out a soft hum that seemed like contentment. The mechanic's hand moved instinctively to scratch gently behind its ear. The dragon didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned slightly into the touch. It was a gesture of trust and gratitude, and the mechanic felt warmth spread through his chest. He knew then that the hardest part was over. The device had been neutralized, the dragon's pain was gone, and trust had been established. But he also understood that care and companionship were ongoing responsibilities. Healing wasn't instant, and patience was key. He had learned that the dragon needed time, space, and consistent kindness to fully recover from weeks of suffering. Over the next few nights, he continued small routines with the dragon. He brought food and water, spoke softly, and allowed it to explore freely. Sometimes it would playfully interact with him, nudging tools or swishing its tail near him without fear. Sometimes it simply lay beside him, resting its head close by while he observed the forest. These moments were quiet but powerful, full of a connection that went beyond words. The mechanic realized that he had formed a bond that would last. The dragon trusted him completely, and he had come to care deeply for it. It was no longer a creature to be feared, nor just an object of curiosity. It was a living being with emotions, habits, and intelligence. And the relationship they shared was a rare and precious thing. As the nights passed, the dragon grew stronger and more confident. Its movements were fluid, its wings stretched fully, and it explored further than ever before. No more trembling, no more cries, no more fear. It was free, not just from physical pain, but from the emotional weight of the past month. The mechanic sat quietly one night, watching the dragon settle into a comfortable resting position under the moonlight. He smiled faintly to himself, feeling a deep satisfaction. What had started as curiosity and concern had turned into something extraordinary, a bond of trust, patience, and care that neither he nor the dragon would ever forget. He understood now that helping someone, whether human or not, was about noticing their pain, approaching with patience, and offering care without expectation. And as he watched the dragon's chest rise and fall calmly for the first time in weeks, he knew that the hardest part was over, and something beautiful had begun, a connection that would last, built on trust, understanding, and compassion. The nights in the forest had changed completely. No longer were they filled with cries and trembling shadows. Instead, the clearing was calm, almost peaceful, except for the soft rustling of leaves in the wind and the quiet sound of the dragon moving freely. The mechanic walked slowly into the clearing, carrying a small container of water and a few pieces of food. He didn't need to call out or try to coax the dragon. It was already there, waiting patiently, watching him with golden eyes full of trust. The dragon had grown confident, moving with a fluidity that had been missing before. Its wings stretched fully in the moonlight, casting long, graceful shadows on the ground. It explored the edges of the clearing carefully, but without hesitation, occasionally pausing to sniff the air or press its nose to the ground. The once restless, crying creature now looked regal, even serene, in the soft light. The mechanic knelt and placed the water and food nearby. The dragon approached slowly, sniffed the items, and then began eating gently. He watched with a quiet smile. The bond between them had grown stronger every day, built on patience, care, and countless nights spent observing, helping, and understanding one another. It wasn't just about removing the device anymore. It was about trust, companionship, and learning to communicate across the divide between species. After the dragon had finished, it came closer, pressing its massive head lightly against his shoulder. The mechanic reached out instinctively, running his hand along its snout and down the soft scales near its neck. The dragon leaned into his touch, eyes half closed, letting him know that it felt safe, comfortable, and understood. That simple gesture spoke louder than words. For weeks, the creature had suffered in silence, crying every night, and now it was relaxed, secure, and willing to connect Dot over the next few nights. The mechanic spent long hours with the dragon, not just feeding it or observing it, but learning its habits and preferences. He noticed it liked the soft moss near the base of an old tree, where the ground was cooler and more comfortable. He saw that it enjoyed stretches under the moonlight, extending its wings and taking slow, deep breaths. Sometimes it would hum softly, a low, vibrating sound that seemed like contentment or even joy. The mechanic had never heard anything like it before, but he recognized it as the sound of relief, safety, and trust. The dragon also began to interact with him in new ways. It would nudge his tools or gently tap his hands, seemingly curious about the objects and the movements. Occasionally, it would lean against him, allowing him to scratch behind its ears or along the neck, small gestures that showed trust and comfort. The mechanic realized that these interactions were a form of communication, a way for the dragon to express its feelings without words. And he responded in kind, speaking softly, moving carefully, and always respecting the creature's boundaries. Days turned into weeks, and the forest clearing transformed into a sanctuary for both of them. The dragon no longer hid or trembled, and the mechanic no longer felt the weight of worry that had plagued him during those first nights. They had become companions, each relying on the other in ways neither had anticipated. The dragon relied on his protection, care, and understanding, while he relied on the dragon's presence, its trust, and the quiet reassurance that came from seeing it healed and free. One night, as the mechanic sat quietly watching the dragon stretch and move under the moonlight, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A month ago, the dragon had been crying every night, alone, in pain and confusion. No one had known its suffering, and it had endured silently. He thought about the courage it had shown, the resilience of its body and spirit, and the trust it had finally placed in him. It was a humbling experience, one that reminded him of the importance of patience, compassion, and understanding. The dragon sensing his reflection, came closer and nudged him gently with its nose. He smiled and stroked the scales near its eyes. The connection between them was no longer fragile. It was steady, strong, and mutual. He realized that this bond was rare and precious. It wasn't just about helping a creature in need. It was about forming a relationship built on trust, care, and respect. Over time, the mechanic also discovered the dragon's playful side. Sometimes it would flick its tail toward him, nudging gently as if inviting him to move or react. Sometimes it would tap at his tools or even swat at small objects, showing curiosity and intelligence. The dragon's personality was emerging fully, and the mechanic felt privileged to witness it. He spoke softly to it, naming the gestures and responding with gentle movements, creating a dialogue without words that both could understand. The forest itself seemed to respond to their presence. Birds returned to the trees near the clearing. Small animals moved more freely, and the rustling of leaves sounded less like warning and more like peaceful music. It was as if the clearing had become a safe haven, not just for the dragon and the mechanic, but for the forest itself. Nature seemed to approve of the harmony they had created, and the mechanic felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his patience and care had fostered more than just trust. It had nurtured balance. The dragon's recovery continued steadily. Its once twisted wings now extended fully without hesitation. Its chest rose and fell evenly, strong and unafraid. And though it had once cried every night, now it slept soundly, curled on the soft moss, sometimes close to the mechanic, as if to ensure that he remained nearby. The quiet huns it made in its sleep reminded him that the suffering had ended, and a new chapter had begun. One evening, the mechanic realized that he could finally explore the dragon more freely. He approached it and gently checked its wings, tail, and scales. It allowed him to examine every part without fear, showing complete trust. He smiled, feeling the pride and joy of a mission completed. What had begun as a series of nightly observations and small acts of care had evolved into a profound relationship of awe, mutual understanding, and respect. He began thinking about the future. The dragon had healed physically and emotionally, but what would come next? Could it remain in the forest safely? Could it live freely without fear? He knew that someday it might leave, exploring beyond the trees and the clearing. But for now, it stayed close, choosing to remain near him, resting in the safety they had built together. And he understood that this choice was its own, a decision made freely, rather than out of necessity. In those quiet nights, he also reflected on what he had learned about life and connection. The dragon had taught him patience, resilience, and the power of trust. It had shown him that care and compassion could heal not just physical wounds, but emotional ones as well. And most importantly, it had shown him that bonds built through understanding and gentle action could transcend fear, species, and the unknown. The mechanic's visits became a part of the dragon's routine, and vice versa. They spent hours together in silence, moving, observing, and simply existing side by side. Sometimes the dragon would roll playfully, nudging him or swishing its tail. Sometimes it would lie quietly, breathing softly, allowing him to sit nearby in peace. Their connection was quiet but deep, a shared understanding that neither words nor gestures could fully capture. One night, under a full moon, the dragon did something extraordinary. It lifted its head high, stretched its wings fully, and let out a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the clearing. The sound was not a cry of pain, but a song of relief, joy, and freedom. The mechanic watched in awe as the dragon moved gracefully, wings extended, body strong and confident. He felt a surge of pride and happiness, knowing that the creature had fully recovered, free from pain, fear, and suffering. He knelt and spoke softly. "You're safe now. You've come so far. I'm proud of you." The dragon lowered its head toward him, nudging gently in response. The trust, the gratitude, and the bond between them were unmistakable. It was a silent conversation of understanding, a connection that needed no words, only patience, care, and time. From that night onward, the clearing became a place of peace and companionship. The dragon no longer cried, no longer trembled, and no longer feared the night. It moved freely, exploring, resting, and interacting with the mechanic in ways that were playful, gentle, and full of intelligence. The bond they shared had grown into something extraordinary, a relationship built on patience, trust, and mutual respect. The mechanic knew that their story wasn't just about removing a device or ending a month of nightly cries. It was about connection, understanding, and care. It was about noticing suffering, approaching with patience, and offering help without expectation. And as he watched the dragon stretch in the moonlight, fully recovered, he knew that the journey had been worth every sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty, and every small step taken in trust. The dragon, once crying every night like a lost and helpless being, now thrived under the quiet care and patience of someone who had refused to turn away. And in the heart of that forest, under the soft glow of the moon, the mechanic realized that sometimes the most extraordinary connections happen in silence, through trust and through the simple act of showing up for someone in need. And so, the dragon and the mechanic remained together, not out of obligation, but out of mutual respect, trust, and companionship. Nights were no longer filled with cries of sorrow. They were filled with calm, safety, and quiet joy. And in that,